I want to start with gratitude. I've been reflecting during this time because, as many of you may know, my husband and I, Will and I, are moving to Marina del Rey in less than 2 weeks. And so we're embarking on this next phase, which of course really isn't true because it's all one life. But my mind has been really aware of the past and reflecting with gratitude of all the amazing things that San Francisco has brought for me in 29 years of living here. But what I want to start with is speaking gratitude to this incredible community. And I want to start with a little bit of history. I feel called to do this. So in 2012, I started an independent New Thought community that was called Awakened Living that has now become Agape Bay Area. And I'm starting with it because during the incredible meditation that Sandra Smith led, it came through me or as me to talk about the original mission of what is now our spiritual community. Because during the meditation, I was really flooded with so much gratitude that we have, yes, stepped into this original vision. Part of our original mission statement was this line: Awakened Living, which of course is now Agape Bay Area, is for spiritual explorers who have a deep hunger for personal and global transformation. I'm going to say it again. Our community is for spiritual explorers who have a deep hunger for personal and global transformation. So when we started the community in April of 2012, and there are a few people that are still with us from the beginning. I know Leslie's on today, Allison. If I've forgotten anyone, I apologize. But we came together as a collective to really ask ourselves what we wanted to consciously create as a New Thought community. And this idea of both personal and global transformation came through in our visioning and our meditations. And I want to share what I think is a kind of a funny story. I went and I took that line, that sentence, to one of my good friends who had been in New Thought for many, many years. And I want to share with you what he shared with me. No one cares about global transformation. Everyone just wants their life to be better. So I sat with that. Yes, and I absolutely recognize, and certainly in my own journey, what drew me to New Thought when I started attending services in 1988 was this idea of creating a better life for myself. I'm not going to lie. That's really was the initial step for me that drew me in. Wow, you mean I can create the life of my dreams? I can use affirmations. I can practice these spiritual principles to have a more dynamic life, one filled with more love and connection, one filled with more prosperity, health, and wellness. Yes, and there was a point in my journey when I recognized the importance and the power of also radiating that consciousness into the world. And so when we started our community in 2012, we were really clear that the ultimate intention of our community was to radiate this frequency or this vibration into the world and be a part of global transformation. And so during the meditation, what I was reflecting on and feeling into is we have, yes, indeed, created this community that recognizes as we have our own transformation, that transformation liberates others. As Marianne Williamson says, when we shine our own light, that naturally liberates others. So there have been a lot of different incarnations of our spiritual community, and I was flashing on all the different locations we had in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. And then we moved to Oakland because that came through in vision as well. There was a pull, Spirit was speaking to us, as us, and through us collectively that it was time to move to the East Bay. So we yielded to that. We trusted that. We moved to the East Bay in 2016. In 2017, we had the honor of affiliating with Agape, which also came through vision. Reverend Dr. Michael reached out to us and said, I've caught this vision that you are going to be the first satellite community of the Agape International Spiritual Center. Wow. Something so much bigger than my mind wanted to create in 2012. And the reason I say that is the power of trusting the inner knowing, trusting spirit. Yielding is a word that I might use. It's leaning into a recognition that when I listen intently to that place within myself, and when we come together and do that collectively, something so much more powerful gets created than what my ego mind might believe that I want. So we shift from this consciousness of I to a consciousness of we. And then with more evolution, more transformation, we land at a place where we recognize that the we is actually one. Isn't that incredible? My journey was, it's all about me in New Thought. I'm going to learn how to, manifest the perfect life. And then I realized that that was something that I wanted to share with the world, to be part of the transformation of planet Earth, being a witness to and a catalyst for this transformation. And then at some point recognizing that it's not even really we, it's really one. And as we affiliated with Agape, some very powerful things happened, including me getting the very clear message 1 year later in 2018 that it was time for me to step away from my position as senior minister. I'm not going to speak for Reverend Joan, but what I will say is I have a sense from her that her mind probably didn't think, oh, I want to be senior minister again of this community. But one thing I know to be true about our beloved Reverend Joan is that she trusts that inner knowing. She trusts that God essence, both individually and collectively. As a matter of fact, a person on this planet that I see yielding to that, maybe more than most any of us, right? So maybe her mind didn't want to say yes to the position, but her spirit knew that it was a yes. And what I want to say about that is then she stepped into that role and then ushered in this incredible new level of leadership that had the foresight to move into a new location. And then we have 2020, which none of us expected. And so the reason I want to say all of that in the beginning of this conversation about radiating our light is that we each have a profound role to play. So as I'm talking about the history of our community, it's one way to look at how we radiate our light. There are no small roles. Each of us has a part to play, and I'm using play very consciously because as I recognize the power of spirit, life becomes an adventure. It becomes play. I'm playing in this spirit. And so every single person who has ever stepped into or onto a Zoom room this year, our community has played a part in the collective consciousness that has created a community that is indeed dedicated to global transformation, being a part of the change that we could easily say is so needed and wanted on planet Earth in 2020. Another way to say it is everything that's ever happened in our lives individually and collectively have led us to this moment where we get to be, as Reverend Michael says, a profound beneficial presence on the planet. Lean into that for a moment, a profound and beneficial presence on the planet. We come to recognize that who we be, and I recognize that's not grammatically correct. I always like to give that little disclaimer, but who we be is so much more powerful than what we do. And then the doing comes from the being and something incredible gets created. We shine our light, we radiate our light, and we recognize that we have a role to play, but it's really not a role, it's an essential beingness. We come home to our true purpose. Our true purpose. You see, it's going to look different for each of us. So you might have a title of minister or practitioner. I'm thinking of Patty. She has a role as a doctor, and she radiates her love and her light to her incredible patients, children, and young people. Each of us has that. Each of us can be the light regardless of what kind of title we have. And then we can use our own unique skills and talents to bring that light into the world. So here we are in December. And in the Northern Hemisphere, we're moving toward the longest night of the year. Of course, I also think it's really interesting that someone in the Southern Hemisphere is having the exact opposite experience. They're moving into the longest day of the year. So isn't that amazing to recognize that where we are placed creates our experience? And so in the Northern Hemisphere, we're moving into the longest night. And so it's really wonderful, and it really is true that we can be the light in the midst of this darkness. But I want to spend a few moments talking about the importance of that relationship with that part of ourselves that we might call darkness. I'm also called to speak to the perspective that we've had on planet Earth on dark and light, and what's emerging in our country with dark and light, and that we might have a value judgment that one is worse or one is better. And so if we look at this in the midst of our spiritual journey, we of course understand intellectually that when you plant a seed, it must be in the ground. We must create the conditions that will allow it to grow. We don't put a seed out in the sun because it won't thrive in the sun. It will get burnt in the sun. It must be down in those conditions, what we might call that darkness or that inner sanctuary. You see, there's no value judgment here. Everything has a part to play in the transformation. And that's true for each of us. And so if we've been in a paradigm where we want to be the light, but don't want to embrace all this other stuff that some of us have once called human, but we now recognize is all part of the process and the transformation. And yes, even what's happening in our country and our world right now is part of the global transformation. Now, some of it feels better than others. I'm not gonna deny that. I don't want to pretend like what's happening in our country and in our world is enjoyable, because there's a lot of pain right now that's present. There's also, of course, a lot of love and joy that's present. There's something really powerful in honoring every part of the path, every part of the transformation that will allow us to then transform into a new way of being and seeing. I feel very deeply that we are on the precipice of great change, of a new awareness, more oneness, more openness, more love. And it does seem that 2020 has been the perfect chrysalis, right? And that in 2021, we can affirm that we want to be a butterfly. Now, of course, even that's an illusion, right? Because there really is no time in spirit. There's only right here and right now, not the clicking of a clock. Remember when we had clocks? I think some of us still do. Not that kind of time, but the essential timelessness of spirit, the unharmability, the place within us that is infinite. And as we move into this period that can be perceived as darkness, we recognize that we must first honor that, cultivate that, create the conditions for new growth and new life. We don't plant the seed and then dig it up. We plant the seed and we allow it to stay in the fertile soil of consciousness, of recognizing that there is a place very deep within us that is unharmed and unharmable. I want to talk for a few moments here about unharmable. What does it create when you believe that you are your past? What does it create when you believe that you are your thoughts? What does it create when you believe that the ultimate truth of who and what you are is your age or your race or your gender? What does it create? That's one of my favorite questions, because my mind, like maybe many minds, focuses on good and bad and right and wrong. But when I ask the question, what does it create? I take all judgment out. And judgment isn't necessarily a negative thing, right? Judgment is what it is. But when I become curious about what gets created when if there's any powerful practice that I invite you to participate in, and that is that simple formula: what gets created when and then fill in that blank. What gets created when I watch the news? What gets created when I meditate? What gets created when I share very authentically and honestly with a loved one the pain and the joy that I'm experiencing during this time? What gets created when? And so what gets created when we recognize there's a place within us that is unharmed and unharmable? And what does really knowing that create in our lives? What gets created when I recognize and understand that at an ultimate level, there isn't good and evil, there is conscious and unconscious. And what I mean by that is, as the reading says, when we wake up to the greater reality, the truth of who and what we are, when I understand and I know that I know that I know that spirit is the reality and what we see on planet Earth is the illusion, when I really know that, everything changes, because then I move from what the world can bring me to what I can offer. And how I offer it is in consciousness. That's the number one role, is our beingness. And so to understand very deeply that there's only conscious and unconscious, I can look at my own life and look at all the ways I've been conscious and unconscious, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of curiosity. Whoa, look what got created when I believed I was broken. Wow. Feel into that. What got created when I really understood that I'm way more than my past. I'm far more than what has happened to me. I'm far more than what I have done. I am an unharmed and unharmable spiritual being. My true essence, my God nature, is more powerful than any conditions in the world, including any conditions that I believe about my past. Because in reality, the only past that actually exists is the past in my mind, the story that I've been carrying. I might be carrying a story of how wonderful my childhood was or how horrible it was. What gets created when I decide, and it is a decision, to finally release that story. I don't need to change it. I don't need to rewrite it. I can recognize that it is only true in relative reality. And to take it a step further, it only is in relative reality in my mind. I'm the one that keeps telling the same story over and over and over again. So yes, we can change the story. Or we can say, isn't that interesting? What gets created when I believe that story? What gets created when I recognize that there's a place within me that is far greater than that? In the reading, I talked about compassion for others who have not yet remembered their true nature. And when I was hearing Michael so beautifully reading it, I was thinking, wow, if I was listening to that through a particular lens, that might sound judgmental. Oh, those poor people who have not woken up to their true reality, their true nature, their Buddha nature, their God essence. And that wasn't my intention, because at any moment I can forget. At any moment, I can believe what I hear on the news, or believe what I read, or believe the story that I have about what I hear on the news, because it really isn't what we're hearing or what we're reading. It's how we interpret what we're hearing that creates freedom or suffering, but only 100% of the time. And so when I have compassion for myself, when I look back on my life and I don't look at it through the lens of good and bad and right and wrong, but instead look at it through the lens of conscious and unconscious, I can recognize that any harm I've ever caused myself and others, and there have been plenty of times that I've done that, it's because I was unconscious. What does that mean? I wasn't conscious to the greater reality that love is who I am, that light is who I am, and that I'm here not to receive from the world or practice the law of attraction, but practice the law of radiance, the power of I am. as Sandra so beautifully said earlier in the meditation, the power of the I am is so much greater than the power of I am not. When I know that and I practice that in the world, I realize the greatest paradox that I've ever experienced. I need nothing from the world. I'm here to radiate that love. And the greatest paradox is suddenly there's more love in my life than I could even imagine. If I'm having issues with money, I can look at the story I've been carrying around about money. I can look at the frequency, feel into the frequency I've been carrying about it. And I can recognize that I don't need money from the world. I can actually share the gifts because gratitude is a powerful frequency. I remember Reverend Maureen Bass, one of my first ministers at Unity in San Francisco, would say, if I'm not grateful for the $5 in my checking account, how would I be grateful for the 5 million? And that really what we're here to do is to infuse the frequency of love and gratitude into every situation in our life, even those parts of our life that feel like they're not going the way we want to go, what we once called bad. Oh, isn't this terrible that this is happening? There's a story, there's a frequency. God, just even feel, when I say those words, feel the frequency. Isn't this terrible that this is happening? What gets created when I say that? What gets created when I feel that? What gets created when I radiate that as a core belief or a core idea? You see, the great news is that's one thought among thousands or millions of others. And when I understand, I can unplug from that, not plug into a new thought, although that's powerful, but plug into the original frequency, the perfection that I am, that you are, that every living being is. And then I can have compassion for myself on those moments I forget, not if I forget, but when I forget. Oh yeah, I started believing the story. I started tuning into that frequency of my own limitation. I have compassion for that. I understand how that came to be. And I also recognize that there's a greater frequency, a greater reality, and that I can cultivate that time in the stillness, in the darkness, in the fertile soil of consciousness. And I can allow that seed of this new life, this new light, to begin to open up. And then eventually come out of that experience of darkness and blossom, being life, being love, and being light. That is our greatest calling. And yes, each of us has been called, each of us, to be that love, to be that light, to contribute to the consciousness of humanity by recognizing a greater reality and having compassion for anyone, including myself, who started to believe the story of limitation, of lack, of fear, of us and them, of good and bad. There is something greater within each and every one of us than any condition in the world, including the condition of my mind. There is a place within me that is the original frequency, the original vibration. So we can call off the search and we can rest in this reality of who and what we are. We can dedicate ourselves from this moment on to remembering that, to cultivating that awareness, to radiating that into the world, because as I often say, life is a great experiment. So let's experiment together. Let's be part of our personal and global transformation. Let's recognize that we do have so much power within us, not force, but power, this true power, this essential beingness. We radiate this into the world and we simply watch what happens to the world. Nothing in the world needs to change. I can be in the world in this new frequency, and then here's the greatest paradox again, the world starts to change. I start to make a difference on planet Earth simply by the vibration that I'm tuning into. I don't even need to raise my vibration. I need to remember my core vibration, that truth, that essential beingness, that place that is unharmed and unharmable.